Thanks for coming over this afternoon. We really appreciate it. My name is Allison Freihoff. I am the lead for our global public sector, healthcare, and global nonprofit team, and we are thrilled that you're with us this afternoon, and we are recording the session, so be enthusiastic. We have a lot of great things to say today. Before I welcome our first speaker and our first nonprofit, I want to remind everyone of the themes that we've been talking about and within nonprofit and public sector over these last day or two. It seems like 3 weeks, but it's been a couple of days. And that is creating a culture of data-driven thinking, a culture of data-driven strategies, and transforming so that really becomes a true part of the culture of your organization. And when you do that, what we see is some incredible opportunities to be able to scale your programs, to be able to create digital experiences, to be able to make better decisions, and to truly be able to have a positive impact on your mission and the world. And that's what gets us excited every single day. And here at AWS and the AWS nonprofit team, we are so thrilled and honored to be able to have numerous programs that help you as nonprofits to get to that data-driven culture, that transformation that you're all hoping to make. And so whether that is our D2E or Data-Driven Everything program, whether it's working with our solution architects, whether it's upskilling your teams, which is so important in the cloud technology and how to think about becoming a data-driven organization, we are here for you, and we are hoping that you will take advantage of all of those opportunities. I am so thrilled that we have the opportunity to talk with two incredible nonprofits who are truly making an impact and have adopted that data-driven transformational culture into their organizations. And we are going to start with Brian Greiwe, who is the Chief Technology Officer for Project Lead the Way. We are so thrilled to have Brian here to tell his story of transformation and optimization of his organization. So please give a big hand to Brian Greiwe.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you.
So as Allison said, I'm Brian Greiwe, Chief Technology Officer of Project Lead the Way. If you haven't heard of us, we are a nationwide education nonprofit. We provide STEM curriculum for pre-K to 12th grade in all 50 states and US territories. 3 years ago, we set out with a 10-year North Star mission, and that mission was to grow our reach to students by an average of double-digit percentage by 2030, and with 50% of those students to be in the nation's highest need schools. Last year, we served about 2.5 million students across the country. And as you can see on the slide, we had over 100,000 trained teachers and had 15,000 plus programs delivered in over 12,000 schools. So what does that really mean? Our mission as Project Lead the Way is to empower students to thrive in an evolving world. And everybody here should know what STEM is, right? Science, technology, engineering, math, and we're all probably products of STEM. But it's not just the STEM concepts and science and technology that we want to teach, but we want to teach those transportable, in-demand skills like collaboration, problem solving, ethical reasoning, critical thinking, and technology skills. And so I have a quick story of what that looks like. About 7 months ago, I was in a 4th grade classroom, and they were doing a project from our curriculum. It's called Rosie's Runtime, where it's an unplugged computer science project where you have a grid on a floor and you have to get a robotic dog from start to her house, her dog house. There are bones along the way she can pick up, and there's puddles along the way that she has to avoid. And students use flashcards to put together directions for a student to act as Rosie and walk along the path to get there. And so I went to a table and talked to the students. It was 1 girl and 3 boys, and I asked them to kind of tell me what was going on. The girl chimed in. She's like, well, what we're doing is we're writing an algorithm for Rosie to get to her house. And says, okay, well, what happens if you run into a problem? Well, if we have to debug our algorithm, then we get together and we iterate through that concept again. And so I'm standing there with this simple conversation with a 4th grade girl talking to me about algorithms, debugging, and iteration, things I didn't learn until I was in college. So I can't imagine where these kids are going to be in 10 years. So talked a little bit about what the curriculum looks like, but these are our programs. We provide first-in-class, best-in-class teacher professional development, Part of that is in our curriculum, so they know how to get trained and certified in our curriculum to teach it. But we started to expand that to what we call a PD suite, so that teachers who aren't teaching STEM courses or aren't teaching Project Lead the Way courses can apply project-based learning concepts to other courses, whether it's social studies, math, other things like that. Launch is our pre-K to 5th grade, introduction to STEM concepts and some of these transportable skills. Gateway is our middle school program. And then when you get into high school, we branch off into 3 pathways: computer science, engineering, and biomedical sciences. And there's 4 years worth of courses for schools to adopt there. Our curriculum is important, but the impact of our curriculum is just as important. So I won't read all the details of these numbers, but as you can see, what Project Lead the Way does is it helps promote extended interest in STEM programs. Our middle school students and our high school students report that they have a higher interest after taking a Project Lead the Way course. And then across the board, 70% of our students say that the Project Lead the Way courses help them in other areas of their study. We've also done statewide studies in Texas, Massachusetts, Missouri, and those studies have shown us that students who take Project Lead the Way courses, they're more likely to graduate high school, they're more likely to enroll in college, more likely to take a STEM major or a STEM career, and more likely to make more money than their non-PLTW peers. Beyond our impact to students is the impact to teachers. And that's really important to us because teachers are the gateway to learning in the classroom. And so with our professional development and on the interactive curriculum that we provide them to use in the classroom, teachers are reporting that they're more satisfied with their job in those classrooms, and they feel more effective when delivering that curriculum. So what does that have to do with AWS? Well, as the education industry continues to morph and to innovate, especially post-pandemic with what happened with remote learning, we also have to innovate. We also have to scale. And so when we look at what we want to offer and we look at our North Star vision for 2030 and growing by double-digit percentage growth, we going from 2.5 million students to 8 million, 10 million, tens of millions of students, we need to scale. So we want to work on a platform and an environment that is scalable for us. Being a nonprofit and selling our products to schools, keeping costs down is also very important. So having a cost-effective, cost efficiency program, that's very important to us. And of course, innovation. What's next? How do we engage? How do we deliver better and more seamless experiences for students and teachers? So I thought I'd give a couple of examples of use cases of where we've really leveraged AWS to impact our students. In 2018, we launched a cybersecurity program in our computer science pathway. And this cybersecurity program, we also call it Network Security Labs. It teaches students how to engage in ethical shared programming, shared privacy, and they have situations where there's a water facility hack, and they have to figure out how to prevent that hack or how to address that hack. Well, we launched this in 2018 with a partner, and that partner had a physical data center. And we had students on board. We were serving 250 concurrently, 250 students at a time. And that was costing us about $40,000 a month. Well, a couple months into that, our partner told us they were going into receivership. And we had until the end of October to get out of their data center. And we had to figure out how to keep that program going. We didn't want to disrupt, we already had schools adopting the program, so we did not want to disrupt the learning for those students. Whether he liked it or not, I had just made a new hire a few weeks earlier, a new app dev manager, who's now our VP of Platform and Engineering. And I came to him and I said, we need to find a way to move this to AWS. And by the way, you've got about 3 months to do it. He's sitting in the audience today. And I think as soon as he got over the deer in the headlights aspect of that, he and his team knocked it out of the park. So what that looked like, in October of 2018, we launched on AWS. And we saw an immediate benefit in our ability to have concurrent users. We doubled our concurrency. And then throughout the year, from a technical aspect, we launched 77,000 EC2 instances for those students to have their own virtual labs hosted in AWS. And we served 1,800 students. Over the next couple of years, we wanted to innovate on that platform and make it even better. So we used serverless with Lambda, we implemented auto-scaling, and we went multi-regional. That way we could scale broader and also have some redundancy in place if a region had an issue. And then finally, over the last couple of years, we've done some more expansion. We expanded our serverless usage. We implemented lab scheduling so a teacher can go in and pre-schedule a lab because we know that every minute in a classroom is important for learning. So even though a lab may only take 2 minutes to spin up, that's 2 minutes that a student's not learning. So with the scheduling, it's a 0% or a 0-second spin up time for them. And then with multi-account, similar to multi-region, more scalability, more stability, more redundancy. And then even with things that we learned last year at reInvent, we implemented some cost reduction measures. So these are some of the stats from that. From 2018 to 2023, we had a 528% increase in students served, from 1,800 to over 11,000. When it comes to the technology part, we went from 77,000 EC2 instances to over 1.5 million. But that spin-up time was really important. We reduced that spin-up time for non-scheduled labs by 30%. And then from a nonprofit perspective, we saw a 38% decrease in our original cost of $39,000 to $24,000. But even in the last couple of months, we've seen that drop down to $15,000 a month. So there were some great advances that we were able to take advantage of on AWS. Another use case is Clever. Clever is an ed tech company that integrates directly with school SIS's data. Prior to the pandemic, the primary way a school would engage with us in our portal is they would upload a CSV, a roster CSV, to create classrooms. That CSV would then generate username and passwords for those students so they could log in. And it worked, but it was a little cumbersome at times. And the data we got in those CSVs, not necessarily the best data. Sometimes it would say student 1, last name 1, everybody had the same birthday. But then the pandemic made it a little bit even more difficult, because what we found out was, especially in our elementary school programs, the usernames and passwords we were using, since they weren't tied to the school, teachers would often go to their students' computers and log them in because the students couldn't remember their usernames and passwords. But now students were in a remote environment and a teacher couldn't go over and look over their shoulder and help them type in their password. So we needed a solution, and that solution was Clever. So working with Clever, even though they're a third party, we had tons of integrations to do on the back end. But what the solution provided that we launched during the pandemic in 2020 was automated classroom rostering and management. So a teacher could go in, if their school was Clever enabled, they'd select the PLTW course they were using, they would select the Clever section, all that data would be imported and the classroom was ready to go. Even better, using Clever, the students could use single sign-on with their school credentials. So no more remembering strange usernames and passwords. And it also gave us better data because we were getting direct access to data uploaded from the school SIS. Now, this diagram does not do justice to the technology behind it. And if you were to take this diagram and maybe make that 5-6 times larger, that really is what's going on behind the scenes to make all this plumbing work between Clever and our systems. And it's all housed on AWS, whether it's using CloudWatch or Lambda, SQS. We do all this seamlessly to the user in the back end, and it's 24-hour syncing, so if something changes in the school SIS, gets put into Clever, within 24 hours it's updated in our system. And these are just some of the numbers. We have a little over 3,500 districts, so not quite 50% of our districts are using Clever, but we served over almost 7,000 schools last year on Clever, 65,000 classrooms, over 480,000 students were rostered via Clever, which translated into 1.5 million course enrollments because the student may take more than one PLTW course. So those are some of our direct customer use cases, but that's not where we stop with AWS. We use AWS internally for operations as well. So as you can see, for operations management and governance, things like CloudFormation, Security Hub, CloudWatch, they help us run the plumbing behind the scenes. We started moving into procurement with AWS Marketplace. So some of our vendors we've onboarded through AWS Marketplace, and some of the tools provided in Marketplace are just really beneficial to us. Our BI team is looking at Glue, starting to look at SageMaker and AppFlow. We just launched a new contact center using Amazon Connect. So we're now seeing the benefits of that and the integrations we have with that in Salesforce. And then virtualization. We've done some great things with virtualization, whether it's onboarding contractors remotely so they can use systems without us having to ship a laptop out to them, or providing images to schools for some of our high compute needs classrooms that have AutoCAD, Revit, those kind of things in it, that allow them to consider expanding beyond a limited lab space in their school system, especially with schools that have one-to-one technology, that low compute computers. They can stream that software directly to their laptop and take a PLTW program that they may not have had access to just due to capacity limitations. So that's things we've done. what's next? And that's a great question. And we continue to ask that question because AWS continues to offer new opportunities to explore and to experiment. We want to expand our use of serverless technology and maybe refactor some of the existing technology we have and put it on serverless. We're going to begin exploring the use of AI, both from an operational standpoint. Plus, we think there's a big need for education, training teachers on AI and also training students on AI. And then support things like chatbots. We could do internal AI chatbots for our team members, things like resetting passwords, simple things that usually require an email or a ticket, and the same thing for our external users. Common knowledge, common questions, things that come from our knowledge base. Instead of having to call an agent or send an email to an agent to get a response, perhaps we could do a chatbot that would allow them to get access to that same information that our agents would use to talk to them. So those are just some ideas. Where we're going to go next, we'll probably have a conversation after this reInvent to see what we learned here, to see what's next. But now I'd like to introduce Alicia Morrison from Mercy Corps.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, my name is Alicia Morrison. I'm Director of Data Science at Mercy Corps. And today, I'd really love to talk to you about not just what Mercy Corps does, but also the journey that we've been on with AWS. Mercy Corps is an international nonprofit humanitarian organization, and this is our mission statement. We exist to alleviate poverty, suffering, oppression, and help people build secure, productive, and just communities. With more than 6,000 employees, we work in 43 countries worldwide, and in 2022, Mercy Corps reached over 38 million people across the world. We work in all kinds of sectors, ranging from education to youth employment, agriculture, technology for development, emergency response, financial inclusion, cash and voucher assistance, peace and conflict, and more. Mercy Corps has always been a very fertile ground for creativity and innovation. We're at our best when our teams are finding new ways to adapt to the new context and take on new ideas. But historically, we haven't always been very good at scaling those innovations. So in 2021, we undertook a major strategic review of our vision as an organization, and two things really rose to the top. The first thing is that we want to work primarily with those who are impacted by climate change and conflict. And the second thing is that we go beyond immediate needs and we try to achieve lasting transformational change at scale. To that end, we're working towards a world where people have water security and climate resilience, food security, peace and good governance, and economic opportunity. But in order to achieve that vision for the world, we have to go to places where people can't take those things for granted. And it's not enough to just target those 4 outcome areas. We are committed to achieving those outcomes through these 5 commitments. And I want to double click on being evidence-driven as well as innovative and creative, because these commitments are where AWS helps us really rise above. So in the end, we're working in the world's most complex and difficult humanitarian contexts, and we have to be able to allocate the right resources and forecast probable futures so we can adapt. If we're sending cash, how much do we need to send? How is the situation going to change in 6 months? And can the market even deal with that cash infusion? We have to put power in the hands of community. And to do that, data is key. So how are we evidence-driven in the cloud, and where does AWS fit into this story? We're leveraging AWS in 3 key ways. First, in order to use data, it has to be accessible. And I don't mean accessible in the sense that you have a login or that it's somewhere on the internet where you can go download it because it's publicly available. What I mean is that the data has a usable, integratable format that's machine readable, so we can use them to not just analyze and visualize, but also to make inferences for decision makers. We're improving our organization's ability to access data by developing lightweight modular engineering processes that address those specific data requirements without forcing us to recreate the wheel for all 43 countries that want to use that type of data. Second, we're looking at the kinds of analyses that can be replicated across country contexts so that our country teams can learn and grow working with each other. AWS tools really enable us to research, explore, learn, and deploy analyses quickly and easily. Right now, we're very focused on building out our use of data science tools like SageMaker to allow a greater access to what I call a foundational suite of analyses that don't necessarily need individual and bespoke attention, so that analysts in the field can focus on what's important. And that's that next level analysis, translating that to a specific humanitarian decision that's relevant to the context that they work in. And finally, we have a major goal to really influence how our sector uses and thinks about data. And when we talk about influencing the sector, we're not just talking about publishing websites or papers. We're talking about how we do business in the cloud, including managing projects. We're talking about how we plan and allocate for cloud costs, and how we resource for experimental use cases. So I want to share just a couple examples of how this works in practice. This example really demonstrates why data access is sort of a foundational component of generating evidence. This isn't the cool Gen AI, but it's really the most important thing we can do for our teams to get started on the data science journey. So we had a team working in the Americas, and they had a plan where when hurricane season started in around June or July, that they would track storms, and when people were at risk, they would partner with an online platform for remittances so that folks living outside of that country could send money home to their families. And so they would say, hey, the hurricane's coming, and the platform would then send messages to those customers and say, hey, we encourage you to send some money home early so that your family can be prepared for this storm. Now, cash can be a really important enabler to folks being resilient to things like hurricanes, right? It means, one, you might have the finances to leave the area or somehow bolster and prepare your houses for those storms. And at the very least, it means those families have cash in their pocket when the storm ends. So that means that recovery begins before the storm even starts. So what the team did last year is they hired a consultant, and that consultant went to the National Hurricane Center website every 8 hours for all of hurricane seasons, about July to November, okay? And they checked it every 8 hours, and if they saw that a storm was coming, they would check it against some thresholds. They would look at wind speed and location, and then they would say, hey, I think we might want to talk to our partner about releasing messages about remittances. And then someone at Mercy Corps would contact the partner, and then the partner would go and do the technical things necessary to release those messages. So it's a really labor-intensive process. So that's what they did last year. So this year they approached us about creating a system. We basically use those data engineering processes to ping an RSS feed every 4 hours, process that data into a report that's easily scannable with the primary information our teams need to make a decision. And then that processing, all happening on Lambdas, then it does two things. One, it sends that report via AWS SES, the simple email service, to our decision makers directly. And then number two, it saves that report back to S3. So this is super simple. I think it costs me about $1 a month. But if you think about a consultant checking the website every day for about 150 days, 15 minutes to check the website, look at all the information, then check it against thresholds, then contact somebody, right? We're saving, I did the math, and we're saving about 115 hours of work over the hurricane season, which equates really to hundreds, if not a couple of $1,000s, when you remember that we actually had to hire and pay a person to do that monitoring. So from a more analytical perspective, I will admit this is a slightly aspirational example. We're kind of in the middle of constructing this architecture. And the original analysis was done a bit more ad hoc. But you might remember that a war broke out in Sudan earlier this year in April. And as it happens, April is the time when everybody plants crops. And those crops are critical for the food supply later in the year across the country. So in April, you know, we make sure our staff is safe, and now we start to ask questions about what's next. And we were kind of worried. Would farmers miss planting season? Did they get displaced from their homes so they're not able to plant because they're not physically present? Would they not be able to get seeds because the farm-to-market roads weren't available? Would seeds be even available in the market? And how would we know and anticipate the impact on overall food security in the country later in the year? Or do we need to worry about that at all? Is that not even a problem and we can turn our resources and our attention elsewhere? So we turned to remote sensing, and we kind of did a back-of-an-envelope methodology. So if you're a geospatial data scientist, it's not the most robust methodology. We can admit that. We're working on it. But what we did is we took a 10-year retrospective of the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, or NDVI, and then we masked that to agricultural areas. And we took that 10-year baseline, and then we began to track month over month what was the NDVI in those same areas this year, and how has it deviated from the historical average. So this doesn't necessarily connect NDVI to production totals, but does give us an idea. Are things growing in places where we normally expect things to be growing? So then we worked with our country team to sort of cross-reference those results with some anecdotal information, some interviews with farmers. And one would kind of assume that where the conflict is worse, you would probably see the least agriculture, right? And certainly we saw that in places like Darfur, the conflict was pretty bad, but they weren't really deviating from the average agricultural NDVI values in those regions. But we did see a downturn in places like Khartoum. Well, it turns out that the conflict was causing a fuel shortage. And in Darfur, they use almost exclusively rain-fed irrigation, whereas in Khartoum, they're using, those are factory farms, and they're using machine irrigation, which requires fuel. So we worked with our team to interpret those results and really came up with an interesting analysis about how we should think about food security in Sudan for the coming year. So now we're working on AWS to do things like process that imagery on tools like through Fargate tasks or batch processing, to drop those into some existing databases, and as 3 buckets that we have that are accessible by front-end applications, so that people can access those results every month when they're ready and use them for either further analysis, visualization, policy and advocacy, et cetera. But when you have it set up on AWS like this, rather than doing this on a desktop machine, it means we just need to point our APIs in the right direction, call the right countries in, make sure the boundary files are available, and we can replicate that same analysis anywhere in the world. So if we wanted to know things like, hey, there's an expected drought this year, are we seeing an impact on agricultural production in the Horn of Africa? We could start to answer questions like that. We could look perhaps at the Kharkova dam collapse, dam destruction in Ukraine, and see if there was an impact on agricultural production in that region. So lots of different ways you can use this very basic analysis to kind of understand what an agricultural or food production situation is. And AWS really helps us to scale that across contexts. Finally, AWS really gives us an opportunity to partner with them and talk about these use cases. They have massive global reach. You're all here at reInvent. Being able to speak at events like reInvent helps us amplify our experience and hopefully promotes more use of these types of tools in the humanitarian sector. So what's next? Well, first, we're working on institutionalizing data science. We want to be data by default and not as an afterthought. Data should be incorporated into all of our program designs and proposals, making us more evidence-driven in a world where data really is a prime mover for donors. Second, we're building on our global shared services that will make that analysis even easier. We're building out a platform called the Rapid Institutional Crisis Response Platform, which will streamline a lot of those data engineering processes and consolidate data access. And then finally, we're still seeking out other opportunities to talk about our journey so that we can have an impact on the aid and development sector. So now I'm going to ask Allison and Brian to come back out and join me.
Oh, fantastic. I think
I'm going here.
I'll do here. Wow, that was amazing. I hope you all are incredibly inspired as we are to understand what's happening in some very different nonprofits in the way that you're approaching things, and really inspired about how you're using the technology to make those things happen. I wanted to delve a little bit into, back to how I started, the culture. You both talked about being data-driven, you talked about bringing data mindsets. How are you doing that? So as we get into thinking about the practicality and how that's really happening within your organizations, because it's really great to put it up on the slide, but then to make it happen for real, give us some insights into how you're doing that. And maybe I'll go back to you, Alicia, first, and then to Brian.
Yeah, so I think one of the first things is that it's right there in our Pathway to Possibility, our 10-year strategy, and our commitment to evidence being data-driven, right? Our commitments to evidence, that's what it means. So we're building it right into everything that we do from the get-go. The second piece is really working through ways to show value up front so that everyone at the country level really understands what this is bringing to the party, right? It's bringing forward use cases like we have in Sudan and really showing that that has a value in humanitarian decision making. We're now looking at how we can repeat this type of analysis and even move it a little bit further, maybe do some forecasting, suss out the relationship between NDVI and production for the next year to support their agricultural programs that are still ongoing in that country. And so now that we have that use case kind of set and proven, we expect a lot more folks to be interested in that. And that's really when you start to see scale. We're very grassroots. And when we scale, it's about kind of driving that grassroots process and letting it work across the organization, because it is about having value. It's not about doing cool stuff. It's about making sure that decision makers have the right information at the right time.
Absolutely. I think that's amazing. It's not just tell, it's show really what the difference can be, and being able to provide that from your strategic plan on down also makes a big difference. So having leaders bought in as well. So it sounds like you have both this grassroots, this is exciting, as well as the top down.
Absolutely.
Very cool. How about you, Brian? What's actually happening to get you to this data-driven thinking?
Yeah, and I think what you said was important. Having leader buy-in is really important. So 4 years ago when I started Project Lead the Way, 5.5 years ago when I started Project Lead the Way, there was a really small BI team, 2 people. And they were doing some work. But as a learning organization, we know it's important for us to continue to develop our skills, but also as an education organization, be able to talk about the efficacy of our programs, the students we reach, the number of schools we're in. And our systems weren't set up in a way that would allow us to really easily access that data. And so we had numbers out there, oh, we're serving 5 million schools, or we're serving 2 million schools, or students. And so we really wanted to get to a maturity level to allow us to have an accurate number. And we then, formalizing our 10-year growth plan, our North Star, we kind of put it out there to all of our customers. Hey, we're going to track data. We're going to have to track data to tell you how we did over these 10 years. So we've invested in our BI team. The team is now 6 people. And last year we did a data literacy initiative across the organization to get a foundational understanding of data, its purpose, its understanding, how do you work with data. And then a portion of the organization took a level up from that if they're the ones really interacting with the data. And that has been part of our culture to become a data-driven, or at least a data-informed culture.
Got it. Love it that you, again, emphasized the leadership, but then the training and helping people across the board to understand, even if they're not going to touch the data, to understand that this is part of who we are and what we do. And also love that you're going from, hey, we touch this many schools, to here is closer and closer to impact and true outcomes. And some of the stats that you showed absolutely showed that as well. Well, each of you are in such different areas and such different modes of how you're impacting the world and having a positive impact. What do you think it is about cloud computing for your context is making such a difference? And I think you both touched on it a little bit, but maybe let's dive a little bit deeper. You know, computers are out there. You can do computer stuff under someone's desk, but why is this idea of cloud computing and accessible data really making a difference? Brian, I'll go back to you and then maybe over to Alicia. Yeah.
So if I wind back a little bit before I was at Project Lead the Way, the organization I worked for explored the cloud,
Okay.
but didn't want to dive in because they were afraid of cost and complexity. But at Project Lead the Way, we've taken the opposite approach. In fact, we have no on-prem physical data center anymore. Post-pandemic, we moved to mostly remote workforce. We do have an office, but we moved everything to the cloud. And you know, people ask, is it worth it? Can I afford it? And with an organization like AWS, the answer is yes, because for us, what the cloud allows us to do is experiment rapidly with new services to see what we can be enabled to do. But at the same time, and I don't mean this in a derogatory term towards AWS, the services are like utilities. You can spin it up, you can test it, you can use it. If it didn't do what you wanted, turn it off. Perfect. And you don't have this long-term contract cost. So it's a safe environment for us to explore, innovate, and advance our mission.
Well, not only don't we take that the wrong way, we love that. We love when you say that, and that it allows you to do this innovation. And as we say at AWS, it's a two-way door. Right, as well, that you're making a decision that you may be able to back out of or make a different decision or change because of that ability to scale up and scale down and optimize. How about you, Alicia? Tell me about cloud and why that's made such a difference.
Yeah, I think about the cloud as a real catalyst for enabling data science. It's not just that AWS has tools like SageMaker or Bedrock that do very high level and impressive analyses all on their own. But again, it's about how do we create things like our database layer, right? If it takes analysts who will have to spend time and energy and maybe know coding languages to do that data engineering, then it's probably not going to happen, right? Our folks are focused on what they're meant to be focused on, which is implementing critical humanitarian aid in places where it's needed most. And then asking a program officer to clean up, you know, an Excel file so that it can be analyzed every single month is crazy. And so AWS and the cloud in general really sort of enables us to get that data into a place where it can be used. And now as we explore bigger use cases like AI and ML, again, it puts us in a position where folks can interact with that type of analysis without necessarily having to be a real data scientist, because you do have these tools that work through the console. You don't have to know all the coding languages and so forth. The second thing is that it's a huge time saver, right? Like, I love Code Whisperer. I have a data science team of 2. And so, like, if I could save time, you know, like, that's a huge enabler. And so, again, it's sort of a catalyst that drives us towards the ability to really execute on that data science program that we're trying to kind of get moving, yeah.
That's great. Well, let's stick with AI, ML, and Gen AI, because why not? It's what we're all hearing every single day while we're here. But more than that, we're hearing every day in the news. But I was, again, just so inspired to see how you're starting to use that, how you're thinking about it, how things like Bedrock and SageMaker are already coming into your language. So tell me a little bit more about what you see could be possible with AI, ML, and even Gen AI.
Yeah, so I mean, we already are sort of working with AI, ML. We have sort of our best example is a use case for Lebanon. And Lebanon has a very severe sort of inflationary crisis going on, right? The value of their currency is depreciating. And so what we've done is kind of look at forecasting through AI ML systems prices of critical commodities. So something called a minimum expenditure basket is sort of this group of commodities that we agree on that people need each month to live, or that a family would need each month to live. And so if we can kind of forecast out what that price is, that means that folks who are doing cash programming, right, can really plan for how far is that dollar going to go. If I'm giving 150 US dollars every month, right, in the Lebanese currency, that means that value is decreasing every month. And I need to understand and communicate to my donors how that's happening. And so there's some really important, just sort of, I think, pretty straightforward forecasting things that we can be doing with AI ML. But we are looking at things like Gen AI as well, right? I mean, I mentioned sort of Code Whisperer and some straightforward use cases like that. But I think there's also a lot of questions around what else can be done there. I think the one thing that came to mind is yesterday I was at a workshop with the geospatial team here at AWS, and they were doing an example where you can create a system that enables you to query a geospatial API for images using plain natural language. And so the example was actually to set up a storm monitoring sort of system. And so, there's some like obvious correlations with the kinds of things that we're doing. I'll get that team to a point where they could just query through natural language, hey, where's the storm going? How bad is it? What are the wind speeds? And so forth, to kind of gauge that impact like they're trying to do. So there's that. But then, of course, it is a little bit of a fraught space with some pieces, since we do work with very sensitive information, beneficiary data. And those are things that I think we're being much more cautious about. We're really thinking through what are those use cases, making sure that they're clear and articulated before we dive in. And that, we are thinking about things like security and being 100% sure that those models and that data is secure before we start putting it into generative AI models.
Secure, and probably the other thing we always think about is that traceability. What's the pedigree of that, and where did it come from, and all of those kinds of things that are in our thinking around responsible use. So that responsible use umbrella of all of these incredible tools. So
absolutely.
Okay, Brian, AI, ML, Gen AI.
So I would say we're early in our discussions about AI, ML, Gen AI. We've talked about AI and ML for a little while of what we could use in our data. Some of the things we've talked about looking at is school buying patterns. We are pretty much a self-sustaining nonprofit. And so understanding when schools buy, why they buy, when they don't buy, and what might be impacting that, whether it's state policies or budgets, and using ML to help us predict some of those things so we know what's coming. And then a couple other real world type use cases. Even just yesterday, I was in a session here talking about building dashboards that you could query with natural language, and being able to get that in the hands of our researchers, our executives, if they're in a meeting and they could ask a question, hey, how many students are we serving today? And the Gen AI can generate that back for us. As I mentioned in talking earlier, we want to also start providing education because the education industry, it's on both ends of the spectrum. Some are scared to death of AI, and some are ready to jump in. And so we want to help train teachers on what the expectations of AI are, and we want to eventually train students. So because they're already working with AI, whether they know it or not. But if we want to train, we also have to have a good understanding of that. So if I take a safe harbor statement of none of this is on our roadmap, but it might be something future thinking, is I could see us using AI and Gen AI to do adaptive learning pathways for students as they progress through our curriculum, to help them get more tailored tasks or projects to themselves, or help them come up with their own types of projects to do based on our curriculum.
Fantastic. I love that. All of those thoughts are amazing. And I also frankly love that some of that was spurred by some of what you saw here at reInvent. So we all know that this is a crazy place for a couple of days, but such great learning going on and inspiration as well. So thank you for that. All right. You talked a little bit about next big things that you're thinking about, and whether Gen AI or AI ML or not, what are those big rocks, those big boulders that you're thinking about next that you need to tackle for your mission? Brian, maybe back to you first.
That's a really great question. We have a huge boulder right now that we're working on because we're going to be presenting or delivering out a new delivery platform for our content to have a better interaction with our students. And so there's a lot of back-end plumbing that has to go on with that, and our team has to. They're working all in AWS to make all this happen, similar to what I talked about with Clever. There's a lot that goes into the background. for that. But I think beyond that, with our North Star mission of the growth that we want to see, continued scalability is going to be really important. The cost optimization is going to be important. And you mentioned it, whether we were going to use it or not. I think AI, Gen AI, there's no way we cannot get involved in that. It's something that we need to understand, the schools need to understand, because it's here, and it's here to stay.
Kind of like that internet thing. All right, Alicia.
Information superhighway. Yeah, so I mean, I think we're doing some thinking about how we collaborate across teams that are using data right now. And so our team focuses primarily on sort of publicly available third-party data, maybe subscription data in some cases. But really it's about context and kind of like understanding the world around our programs to help us adapt or plan programs. But we also need to measure programs and the impact of our programs. So that's looking a little bit deeper, and then looking even a little bit higher, right? We need to think about all kinds of other things in context, political sphere, economic sphere, how do those things interact, and how do we interpret data in that context? So, between our team on technology for development and then our monitoring and evaluation team and our crisis analysis teams, I think we're all really working on like, what is that operating model so that we can really integrate all of that information to create our true information space for our program leaders. So I think that's one big thing from more the organizational and culture perspective. I think from a sort of technology perspective, continuing to build out the platforms that we've been working on, which includes sort of the Rapid Institutional Crisis Response platform, which is really just sort of a geospatially sort of oriented data catalog. That's going to be a really important kind of use for folks as we get deeper into these types of analysis, make sure that they're able to access and visualize those results. But then also thinking more deeply about how we plug in sort of these machine learning models. And I think like one of the things that I'm really thinking about strongly is where have people done the work already that needs to be used? And I think there's a lot of organizations, academic institutions that are doing amazing work in this space. But we're the folks that can really use that information. And so we need to connect those dots a little bit better. And so we're kind of like, I'm personally on kind of like a mission to like go out, find those research projects and plug them into a tool like AWS so that then those results are actually generated and put in front of people who can use them.
Got it. Such incredible work. And I know those that are here and those that might listen to the recording, I mean, just inspired and saying, wow, such wonderful things that you're doing to impact and for your mission and to take that forward and to allow your staffs and all the people who are dedicated to your mission to do more of what they do best, which is be human and think about the humanity of all of this while all of this analysis is going on in the background. So for those that are saying, I'm either getting started on my journey or I'm right there with you, some guidance. So you can get a little philosophical on what would your guidance be on how to get even to the point that you are? And I know you have such aspirations, but you've also come so far. So a little bit of guidance. Maybe Brian, if you want to start.
Sure. I would say just do it. Don't be afraid. Again, because of the way AWS is structured, if you're not already in, or if you're just starting your journey, don't be afraid to try some things out. Don't be afraid to experiment, because AWS allows you to experiment at a very low risk and very low cost. AWS provides lots of free training. There are some excellent paid trainings. My team's done immersion days. That's how we got to Amazon Connect. Did a great immersion day to train the team up to understand the technology we're going to be implementing. And then if you don't have an account team or you don't have a great relationship with your account team, invest in your account team. Our account executive, our SAs, they are great partners. They feel like part of our organization. We come to them with a problem, and they go off and try to figure out how to solve it. And sometimes the answer isn't always an AWS solution. they might point us in a different direction. And it feels really good to have that kind of partner to walk you through your journey. And when we were in our AWS infancy, they were there to help us. And now that we're more mature, we haven't arrived, they can be more in depth with us and help us grow further. So.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you to the team that is a part of that, and all of the teams across AWS that are working with you. Alicia, guidance and...
Yeah, well, let me double click on what Brian said. Is whether it's AWS or another find a partner who wants to go with you on this journey, because particularly if you're a nonprofit, it's going to be very difficult to go it alone. I think find a partner that will invest time and human resources into your organization, right? It's the time that solutions architects and accounts managers and stuff spend with us that I think is the most valuable thing that we can get from a partner, right? Having opportunities like this is really like a huge part of the journey. And I think from like a real technical perspective, it's think big, start small. Mm-hmm. Again, it's about proving value, and particularly if you're like us and needing to do some organizational transformation, then you've got to prove that it works, right? And until you can prove that, folks aren't really going to believe you. And I think we're in a better position now than we were 5 or 10 years ago, where people do kind of realize you got to kind of get on the boat. But the sort of really investing resources into it is going to come once you have value add. And it's not just about the financial resources, but it's also about like mental capital from your organization, right? Like I just talked about kind of the storm tracking system, and holy moly, maybe we can do that with Gen AI, right? And that's an amazing idea. I would never have that idea if somebody hadn't invested time to help me understand what information they need from the National Hurricane Center for us to then put that project through an automation process, to email it to somebody. And that's such a simple solution that has saved them a ton of time and energy. And we would never think of the next step. And people wouldn't have those ideas, right? Like the Sudan analysis is kicking off all kinds of ideas now. Because once people see it in front of them, everybody's creative. But until you can kind of envision the world of the possible, I think you don't have that creativity as an organization.
I think that's really great. It brings up so many of our Amazon leadership principles. So learn and be curious, right? Bias for action, all of those things are just get started, try something, proof of concept, two-way door, something that's not going to be something that you can't change or back out of if you need to, but you can scale up also if it works and it's exciting and it has that value for the organization. Well, we are almost at time. I just can't thank you enough for being here, for giving your time, for telling your story, and for being so dedicated, because as customer obsessed is another one of our principles, as our teams are, and thinking about the partners, we just so appreciate everything that you do in the world, and for being here as well. So thank you very much. Please give a big round of applause to Alicia and to Brian. Thank you so much.